The groom of today's wedding is my fiancé. He proposed to me 3 months ago.
Emily lifted the microphone with both hands and tried to steady her breathing as 500 wealthy guests filled the ballroom beneath a ceiling covered in crystal chandeliers worth more than most homes. The wedding at the Ashford Grand had already been called the social event of the year. Billionaires, celebrities, politicians, old money families, and business executives had flown in from different parts of the country just to witness the marriage between Charlotte Whitmore, the only daughter of tech magnate Daniel Whitmore, and the man everyone believed was a rising financial genius named Ethan Cole. Emily had been hired only 12 hours earlier after the original singer was hospitalized following a highway accident. Payment for one night of singing was enough to stop the foreclosure threatening the home her late father left behind for her and her younger sister. To Emily, this wedding was never supposed to be personal. It was just another performance. One more night pretending everything in her life was stable while privately drowning in debt, pressure, and exhaustion. She adjusted the silver bracelet on her wrist, closed her eyes for 1 second, and reminded herself that once the music started, nothing else would matter. But then the ballroom doors opened upstairs. The guests stood to their feet. The groom appeared at the top of the staircase, and Emily forgot how to breathe, because the man smiling beside Charlotte Whitmore was Ethan, her fiancé, the same man who kissed her forehead the previous night and told her he would be unavailable today because of an important investor meeting in Boston. The same man she trusted enough to sign over $60,000 using her family house as collateral because he promised it would secure their future together. Emily's fingers tightened around the microphone as memories began crashing into her head faster than she could stop them. Ethan placing a pearl engagement ring on her finger. Ethan promising her they would finally stop struggling. Ethan telling her he loved the way she believed in people even after life had disappointed her so many times. Now he was standing beneath golden lights beside another woman wearing a tuxedo Emily helped pay for without even knowing it. The applause around the ballroom sounded distant, almost underwater. Ethan looked toward the stage casually at first, expecting to see a stranger hired to sing for the evening. Then his eyes met Emily's. His smile disappeared instantly, not slowly, not awkwardly, completely. And in that exact second, Emily realized something that made the betrayal feel even worse. Ethan had never expected the two parts of his life to collide. He thought his lives were perfectly separated. He thought the woman he stole from would never stand in the same room as the woman he planned to marry next. What nobody inside that ballroom understood yet was that the wedding they came to celebrate was about to become the public exposure of a professional fraud artist who had spent years manipulating women for money, status, and access to wealth. Because Emily was not simply standing there with a broken heart. She was standing there with evidence. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 2 months earlier, Emily Carter still believed her life was finally changing for the better. She lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago with her younger sister, Lily, in the same small house their father purchased before cancer took him 5 years earlier. The house was old, the plumbing failed constantly, and some winters the heating barely worked. But to Emily, it represented the last surviving piece of her family. She worked 6 nights a week, performing at restaurants, private events, hotel lounges, and charity dinners, while Lily attended nursing school during the day and worked part-time at a pharmacy at night. Money was always tight. Bills were always late. But Ethan changed the atmosphere of their lives almost immediately after entering it. He arrived calm, polished, intelligent, and emotionally attentive in ways Emily had never experienced before. He remembered details most people ignored. He asked about Lily's exams. He remembered Emily's favorite coffee order after hearing it once. He noticed when she was stressed even when she tried hiding it. To Emily, Ethan felt safe, consistent, mature, the type of man women spend years hoping to find after disappointment teaches them to stop expecting too much from people. Ethan talked often about investment consulting and private equity firms. He traveled frequently, always explaining that high-level clients demanded unpredictable schedules. Emily never questioned it because he always seemed to have answers prepared before questions even formed. He paid for expensive dinners without hesitation. He arrived in luxury cars. Hotel staff greeted him by name. Everything about him looked successful. Looking back later, investigators would say that was one of Ethan's greatest strengths. He understood how to create the appearance of wealth better than people who actually possessed it. The proposal happened on a rainy Thursday evening inside Emily's kitchen while old jazz music played quietly from a speaker near the sink. Ethan cooked dinner himself that night. Pasta, garlic bread, candles, wine that cost more than Emily normally spent on groceries for a week. Emily laughed when she realized he was nervous because Ethan almost never appeared nervous about anything. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box containing a pearl engagement ring. Not a diamond, a pearl. Years earlier, Emily once mentioned during a conversation that pearls felt more elegant because they looked timeless instead of flashy. Ethan remembered. That detail broke her emotionally before he even asked the question. She said yes immediately. She cried. Lily cried. Ethan held Emily against his chest while promising her that their difficult years were finally ending. For the first time since her father's death, Emily allowed herself to believe stability might actually exist. 3 weeks later, Ethan sat beside her at the kitchen table and introduced what he described as the opportunity that would permanently secure their future. He explained that a private investment group connected to one of his clients was opening a short-term position expected to generate enormous returns within 60 days. He claimed he already invested everything available to him but needed additional liquidity to secure the final position. Emily hesitated the moment he mentioned using the house as collateral for a temporary loan, but Ethan never raised his voice or pressured her aggressively. He simply held her hand and spoke softly about trust, marriage, and building a future together. He made the decision feel romantic instead of dangerous. That was what Ethan understood better than most manipulators. People rarely surrender everything because of force. They surrender because someone makes sacrifice feel like love. Emily spent 4 sleepless nights thinking about it before walking into the bank and signing the documents. $60,000, the largest financial decision of her life. Ethan kissed her forehead afterward and whispered that one day they would laugh about how scared she had been. 2 days later, he left for what he called a financial conference in New York. He called constantly during the trip. Morning calls, late-night texts, random voice notes telling Emily he missed her. He asked about Lily. He asked if the roof leak had been repaired. He sounded so emotionally present that Emily never considered the possibility that every interaction was carefully maintained to prevent suspicion. What she did not know was that while she sat in Chicago believing she was helping build a future with the man she loved, Ethan was already attending private dinners with Charlotte Whitmore and her family inside Manhattan penthouses overlooking Central Park. Daniel Whitmore's fortune was estimated somewhere above $90 billion through technology investments, energy infrastructure, and defense contracts. Charlotte was his only child. To Ethan, she was not simply a woman. She was access to generational wealth beyond imagination. Investigators later discovered Ethan spent almost a year researching the Whitmore family before arranging an introduction through fabricated business connections. He studied Daniel Whitmore's charitable foundations, estate structure, corporate partnerships, and public interviews. He memorized Charlotte's interests from old magazine articles and social media posts. By the time he finally met her, he already knew exactly how to present himself as the ideal man she had been searching for. Standing inside the Ashford Grand Ballroom, Emily could feel hundreds of eyes moving between her and Ethan, but her mind was no longer focused on the wedding. It was replaying every moment of the last 2 years and forcing her to look at them differently. The details she once interpreted as signs of sophistication suddenly felt carefully engineered. Ethan never allowed conversations to remain on him for too long. Whenever Emily asked about his childhood, he answered with short, polished stories that sounded complete without actually revealing anything meaningful. He rarely mentioned relatives. Emily had never met his parents, siblings, or even longtime friends. At the time, she accepted his explanation that his work kept him constantly traveling and disconnected from most people. Now standing there with a microphone trembling slightly in her hands, she realized she could not even confidently say where Ethan truly lived before meeting her. Every story he told suddenly felt rehearsed. Every memory felt unstable. And the most frightening part was how naturally he made dishonesty feel believable. because Ethan never behaved like the men women are usually warned about. He did not yell. He did not act recklessly. He listened carefully. He remembered emotional details. He made Emily feel emotionally safe at the exact moments she needed comfort the most. That was what made him dangerous. The manipulation never looked aggressive. It looked loving. Years before Ethan entered her life, Emily became the person responsible for keeping her family together after her father Daniel Carter died from pancreatic cancer. The hospital bills destroyed what little savings they had. Her mother had already passed away when Emily was younger, leaving Emily to become both provider and protector for Lily before she was emotionally prepared for either role. While other women her age traveled, built careers, and planned weddings, Emily spent years choosing between groceries, electricity bills, and mortgage payments. She learned how to smile through exhaustion because she believed falling apart would only scare Lily. Ethan entered their lives during the period when Emily felt emotionally worn down enough to finally appreciate someone offering stability. He carried groceries without being asked. He fixed broken cabinets around the house. He brought flowers for Lily after difficult exams. He never appeared impatient when Emily became anxious about money. To everyone around her, Ethan looked like the answer to years of suffering. Even Lily trusted him completely. But there were moments Emily ignored because love has a way of convincing people that discomfort means overthinking. Ethan's expensive watches changed often, yet Emily never saw him working in any traditional sense. His stories about clients sounded impressive, but strangely difficult to verify. He disappeared for long stretches, claiming confidential meetings prevented him from answering calls. Sometimes he returned from trips with luxury gifts despite complaining days earlier about financial pressure. Once, Emily jokingly asked why someone as successful as Ethan still rented apartments instead of buying property. Ethan laughed softly, kissed her forehead, and said wealthy people avoid tying money down emotionally. At the time, the answer sounded intelligent. Now it sounded practiced. And as Emily stared across the ballroom at the man preparing to marry Charlotte Whitmore, one terrifying question settled into her mind harder than all the others. If Ethan lied this convincingly to her for years, how many other women had he done this to before? What made Ethan so difficult to question was how ordinary and genuine the relationship felt when nobody else was watching. Their happiest moments were never expensive vacations or luxury parties. They were small private moments that looked real because Emily believed real love was supposed to feel simple. Ethan cooked with her in the tiny kitchen while old soul music played from her father's radio, sitting near the window. He stood behind her while she stirred pasta sauce and wrapped his arms around her waist like he had nowhere else on earth he needed to be. Some nights they stayed awake until 2 in the morning talking about things Emily never shared with anyone else. Her fear of losing the house, her guilt over becoming emotionally exhausted after years of taking care of Lily, her regret that her father never lived long enough to watch her perform on a real stage. Ethan listened carefully every single time. He never interrupted her vulnerability. He studied it. Later investigators would describe Ethan as someone who learned emotional patterns the same way experienced businessmen study negotiations. He identified pain, loneliness, insecurity, and hope faster than most people recognized it within themselves. Then he mirrored exactly what his target needed emotionally. But Emily did not know that yet. To her, Ethan simply felt thoughtful in ways modern relationships rarely felt anymore. Their phones were filled with long conversations and affectionate messages stretching back almost 2 years. Ethan sent good morning texts before Emily woke up for work. He remembered dates she forgot herself. One winter evening, Emily casually mentioned missing a discontinued vanilla candle her mother used to buy when she was a child. 3 weeks later, Ethan surprised her after work with the exact candle ordered from a collector online. Emily cried immediately because she believed nobody had ever paid attention to her that deeply before. That was Ethan's real talent. He understood that people trusted grand gestures less than tiny remembered details. The proposal itself happened quietly inside Emily's kitchen during a thunderstorm while rain hit the windows hard enough to drown out traffic outside. Ethan wore jeans and a dark sweater. No photographers, no restaurant audience, no elaborate speech designed for social media. He simply reached into his pocket while Emily laughed at something Lily said from the living room and held out the pearl engagement ring Emily once described years earlier as more beautiful than diamonds. Emily covered her mouth instantly and started crying before he even finished asking the question. Ethan smiled softly the entire time, almost emotional himself, as he slipped the ring onto her finger and whispered that she deserved peace after everything life put her through. Emily believed that moment completely. She replayed it in her head during lonely nights at work because it represented security, partnership, and finally being loved in a way that felt emotionally safe instead of painful. But while Emily spent those weeks imagining wedding plans, future children, and a life beyond survival, Ethan was already organizing the next phase of his escape. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Sunday evening while Emily sat at the kitchen table sorting overdue bills into small desperate categories she hoped somehow made the numbers feel less frightening. Ethan arrived carrying takeout and a bottle of wine, calm and affectionate as always, but Emily noticed almost immediately that his energy felt unusually focused. He waited until Lily left for her night shift before finally bringing up what he described as a rare financial opportunity connected to one of his wealthiest clients. Ethan explained that a private investment group was preparing to close a short-term deal involving luxury commercial property acquisitions overseas. According to him, investors who entered early would double their money within 60 days once the contracts finalized publicly. He spoke carefully, never sounding overly excited or aggressive. That was important. Ethan understood that desperation makes people suspicious, but confidence makes them comfortable. He explained that he already committed most of his own capital and only needed temporary liquidity to secure the final position before the opportunity closed permanently. Emily listened quietly at first, confused why someone as financially successful as Ethan suddenly needed help from someone struggling to keep her lights on. Ethan immediately reached across the table and took her hand before she could fully question him. Then he used the exact emotional pressure he knew would reach her the fastest. "Emily," he said softly, "we're practically husband and wife already. This isn't just my future, it's ours." That sentence stayed inside Emily's head long after the conversation ended. Ethan spent the next several days moving carefully, never forcing the decision, but continuously reinforcing the emotional picture he wanted her to see. He talked about paying off the mortgage completely, helping Lily finish nursing school debt-free, traveling together after years of survival mode. Emily wanted to believe him because believing him felt easier than continuing to carry the entire weight of her family alone. Finally, after nearly a week of hesitation, Emily walked into the bank holding a folder containing the deed to the house her father spent 23 years paying for before cancer took him away. She remembered staring at the framed photograph of him near the front door before leaving that morning, almost hoping guilt would stop her. Instead, she convinced herself this was exactly what her father would have wanted. A chance for stability, a chance for security, a chance for his daughters to finally stop struggling. The loan officer reviewed the paperwork while Emily sat there fighting anxiety so intense her hands felt numb. $60,000 transferred electronically into an account Ethan personally provided. The moment the confirmation email arrived, Ethan kissed her forehead and pulled her into his arms while promising she had just changed both their lives forever. Emily smiled against his chest because she trusted him completely. She did not realize until much later that she was not investing in their future together. She was financing his performance for another woman. Emily didn't just give him money, she gave him the only thing her father left behind. 3 days later, Ethan boarded a flight to New York claiming he needed to finalize the investment personally with his clients. And then, slowly, carefully, almost invisibly at first, he began disappearing. By the time the wedding ceremony officially began, Emily had already convinced herself that her growing anxiety came from exhaustion, not suspicion. Ethan's communication during the previous 48 hours became shorter and less frequent, but he still replied just enough to prevent panic. He texted her that his meetings were running late. He apologized for missing her calls. He promised they would celebrate properly once he returned from New York. Emily wanted to believe him because the alternative felt too painful to even consider, so she focused on her performance instead. She adjusted the silver microphone stand near the orchestra platform, while servers carried champagne through the ballroom and photographers prepared near the staircase. Guests filled every table dressed in designer suits and couture gowns, that made the entire room look less like a wedding and more like a private gathering for people who controlled industries. Emily kept her posture calm and professional even while silently thinking about the overdue mortgage notices sitting unopened on her kitchen counter back home. The payment from this event would buy her time. That was all she cared about. Buy time, save the house, protect Lily. Everything else could wait until Ethan came home. Then the orchestra suddenly changed tempo. Conversations softened across the ballroom almost instantly. The enormous double doors above the staircase opened slowly as golden light spilled across the marble steps. Guests stood to their feet applauding, while Charlotte Whitmore appeared in a breathtaking white gown beside the man waiting to escort her downstairs. Emily smiled politely at first, like every performer trained to remain composed under pressure. Then the groom turned slightly toward the ballroom, and Emily stopped breathing. Her body reacted before her mind could fully process what her eyes were seeing. Her fingers tightened violently around the microphone. Her pulse slammed against her chest hard enough to make her dizzy. The applause around the room became distant and distorted as Ethan Cole stepped fully into view wearing an expensive black tuxedo Emily had never seen before, his hand resting confidently against Charlotte Whitmore's waist like he belonged there, like this had always been his life. Emily stared at him without blinking, trying desperately to force reality back into something understandable. But every detail only made the truth worse. Ethan's watch, Ethan's smile. Ethan's voice softly thanking guests as they descended the staircase together. It was him, completely him, no misunderstanding, no coincidence. In that moment, Emily realized the business trip was his wedding. Her breathing became uneven immediately. One hand gripped the microphone, while the other instinctively moved toward the pearl engagement ring still resting on her finger. Across the ballroom, Ethan continued smiling comfortably until his eyes finally lifted toward the stage, toward Emily. The exact second he recognized her, something terrifying happened. His smile vanished completely, not confusion, not embarrassment, calculation. Fast, cold calculation moving behind his eyes while he tried processing how impossible this situation should have been. Emily could almost see him mentally rearranging lies in real time, searching for an escape that no longer existed. Around them, the orchestra continued playing beautifully, while 500 wealthy guests celebrated a love story that was collapsing second by second in front of them without realizing it yet. And somewhere inside Emily's mind, louder than the music, louder than the applause, louder than the panic crashing through her chest, one number repeated itself over and over again. $60,000. For several seconds, Emily remained completely frozen beside the orchestra while the ballroom continued celebrating around her, unaware that the entire foundation of the evening was beginning to collapse. Part of her wanted to walk away immediately, leave the microphone, leave the hotel, leave Ethan standing there with his lies and never look back. But another part of her kept thinking about the house, about her father spending decades working overtime shifts to keep that home in the family, about Lily studying late every night believing their future was finally becoming stable, about the humiliation of realizing the man she planned to marry had used her trust to finance another woman's wedding. And slowly, something inside Emily changed. The heartbreak remained, but underneath it another emotion began taking control. Clarity, sharp, focused clarity. Ethan stood downstairs beside Charlotte Whitmore trying to maintain composure, but Emily noticed the first real crack in him immediately. He kept glancing toward the stage every few seconds instead of looking at his bride. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened. For the first time since she met him, Ethan looked uncertain. Emily inhaled slowly, steadied her trembling hands against the microphone stand, and stepped forward before the orchestra leader could announce the first song. Her heels echoed softly across the ballroom floor as conversations gradually faded into silence. 500 wealthy guests turned toward the stage expecting music. Instead, they found a woman staring directly at the groom like she had just discovered something devastating. Emily lifted the microphone carefully. Her breathing finally steadied. Then she spoke. "Before this wedding continues," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the ballroom with frightening calmness, "there's something everyone here deserves to know." The silence afterward felt immediate and unnatural. Charlotte Whitmore looked confused at first, glancing between Emily and Ethan, while several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Daniel Whitmore slowly lowered his champagne glass without taking his eyes off the stage. Ethan forced a small smile and started taking a step forward, as though preparing to interrupt her, but Emily continued speaking before he could regain control of the room. "My name is Emily Carter," she said, "and the man standing beside Charlotte Whitmore proposed to me less than 3 months ago." The ballroom exploded into whispers instantly. Several guests turned toward Ethan, expecting him to laugh or deny it immediately, but he hesitated 1 second too long. Emily removed the pearl engagement ring from her finger and held it toward the crowd. "He told me we were building a future together," she continued. "He told me he loved me, and then he convinced me to take out a $60,000 loan against the house my late father left for me and my younger sister, because he claimed he had a private investment opportunity that would secure our future permanently." Charlotte's expression changed completely now. The confusion disappeared. Something colder replaced it. Ethan finally moved toward the stage, trying to regain authority over the situation. "Emily," he said quickly with a strained laugh, "this is not the place for whatever misunderstanding you think." But Emily cut directly through him before he could finish. "There was no investment," she said firmly. "The company was fake. The meetings were fake. The business trip was fake. He used my money to create the life all of you are looking at right now." Gasps spread through the ballroom as guests instinctively pulled out phones and began recording openly. Ethan looked around the room, realizing too late that control was slipping away faster than he could recover it. Emily's eyes never left him. "The suits," she continued, "the hotels, the cars, the jewelry, even this wedding appearance, my money helped pay for all of it." Charlotte Whitmore slowly turned toward Ethan now, her face pale with disbelief. The entire ballroom waited silently while Ethan searched desperately for words strong enough to stop what was happening. Charlotte stared directly into his eyes and asked the question that finally shattered whatever remained of his performance. "Is any of this true?" Ethan opened his mouth immediately, then stopped. And in the silence that followed, every person inside that ballroom got their answer. The ballroom remained completely silent after Charlotte Whitmore's question, because everyone understood that Ethan's hesitation mattered more than any explanation he could possibly give afterward. Daniel Whitmore stood slowly from his table, while security personnel near the exits instinctively moved closer toward the center of the room. Ethan attempted to recover control by insisting Emily was emotionally unstable and confused about the nature of their relationship. But the confidence that once made him convincing was disappearing rapidly. Emily calmly unlocked her phone and displayed photographs of their engagement, screenshots of text messages, wire transfer confirmations, and voice recordings where Ethan personally discussed the investment opportunity and promised the loan would be repaid within 60 days. Charlotte listened without interrupting, while Ethan's entire carefully constructed identity began collapsing piece by piece in front of 500 guests, recording everything on their phones. Daniel Whitmore immediately stepped away from the ballroom with 2 members of his private legal team, and what happened next transformed the situation from personal betrayal into something far larger. Within less than 1 hour, investigators hired by the Whitmore family uncovered information that shocked even Emily. Ethan Cole was not his real name. The financial consulting firm he claimed to own existed only on paper through falsified registration documents and a professionally designed website containing fabricated client testimonials. The luxury apartment he claimed as his residence was a short-term rental booked month to month through a corporate account connected to another fake identity. Every expensive car Emily ever saw him drive had been rented temporarily through high-end vehicle services. His investment history was invented entirely from forged documents designed to survive basic financial scrutiny without surviving deeper investigation. But the most disturbing discovery came later that night after investigators examined Ethan's financial activity across multiple states. Emily was not the first woman he manipulated this way. There had been others, different cities, different names, different fabricated careers. The same pattern repeated carefully each time. Ethan targeted emotionally vulnerable women carrying some form of financial pressure or personal loss. He built trust slowly over months or years, presented himself as emotionally stable and financially successful, then introduced investment opportunities requiring temporary support before disappearing once the money transferred successfully. Investigators discovered records connected to at least 4 women who lost savings, property, or retirement funds after relationships with Ethan under different identities. Charlotte Whitmore had never been the beginning of his plan. She was the final target, the largest one. Daniel Whitmore's fortune represented access to wealth beyond anything Ethan previously reached, and investigators soon realized Emily's stolen money funded almost every detail that allowed Ethan to enter the Whitmore family successfully. The luxury suits, the designer watches, the private club memberships, the expensive gifts Ethan presented to Charlotte during their relationship. Even the pearl engagement ring he used to propose to Emily had been purchased using money taken from another victim months earlier. Emily stood quietly near the ballroom stage listening as pieces of Ethan's real life emerged one after another, and with every new discovery, the betrayal became more painful because it forced her to understand something she never considered before. Ethan did not simply lie to women, he studied them. He learned their emotional weaknesses the way predators study patterns before hunting. And the most devastating truth of all was realizing that while Emily spent years loving Ethan honestly, Ethan spent those same years calculating how to use her trust for access, money, and status. Emily paid for the costume Ethan wore to deceive another woman. Ethan Cole was arrested less than 3 weeks after the wedding at the Ashford Grand. Federal investigators expanded the case quickly after discovering evidence connected to fraud, identity theft, wire transfers across multiple states, and financial manipulation involving several victims under different aliases. News coverage of the scandal spread nationally after videos recorded inside the ballroom reached millions of people online within days. For many viewers, the most unforgettable image was not Ethan being escorted away in handcuffs. It was Emily Carter standing alone beneath crystal chandeliers, holding a microphone with tears in her eyes, while calmly destroying a lie that had taken years to build. Daniel Whitmore's legal team helped fast-track financial recovery efforts connected to the fraudulent transfers, and after months of investigations and court proceedings, Emily recovered enough money to fully repay the loan attached to her family home. The foreclosure threat disappeared permanently. One evening shortly after receiving confirmation from the bank, Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table staring at the paperwork while Lily wrapped both arms around her and cried against her shoulder. For the first time in years, Emily finally allowed herself to cry too, not because she missed Ethan, not because she regretted exposing him, but because the pressure of surviving alone for so long had finally started lifting from her chest. The house their father spent his entire life protecting would remain theirs. And somehow, after everything Ethan tried to take from her, Emily was still standing. 8 months later, Emily walked onto the stage of a sold-out theater in downtown Chicago for her first headline concert. The audience rose to their feet before she even sang the opening note, because by then millions of people already knew her story. But the crowd was not there simply because of scandal. They came because Emily represented something people recognized immediately when they saw it: survival, strength, honesty. Lily sat in the front row smiling through tears while Emily adjusted the microphone beneath warm stage lights that looked nothing like the ballroom where her life almost collapsed months earlier. This stage belonged to her now, not because someone handed it to her, because she survived long enough to reach it herself. Emily looked out across the crowd quietly for one moment before finally speaking. She said she used to believe losing Ethan destroyed her future. Then she smiled softly and told the audience the truth she only understood after everything ended. She thought losing him destroyed her life, but losing him was the first thing that finally saved it. What would you have done if you were standing in that ballroom? Would you expose him publicly or walk away silently? And if you think this story was shocking, wait until you hear the next one.